Campers, it's me, Ari Lehman, the first Jason Voorhees. From Friday the 13th, I'm here with AJ, and he's got the juiciest slice ready for you. It's dripping with blood. Jason never dies.
What makes a horror film kill memorable, terrific, even in some way profound or poignant? Let's explore. Thanks for checking this out. If anything about it trips your fancy, please like, subscribe, and share.
Oh, yes.
Without further ado.
Into New Year's Eve, Miss Jane Marley.
On New Year's Eve, a sanitarium nurse made the mistake of stepping away for a smoke. Unaware that in so doing, she opened herself up to being co-opted into the role of a madman's pawn.
I'm going to commit murder at midnight.
When the lady ran into a bit of a debonair person of interest.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
One claiming that he was sent as something of an angel of mercy.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm Jeff Winters. I'm sorry I'm late.
For purposes of easing her and her co-workers' burdens.
They sent me over from county. Temporary help, they said.
We can sure use you.
She saw a handsome face coupled with a captivating air.
Afraid I don't know my way around here yet.
Well, I'll show you.
And quickly fell prey to his performance.
Maybe this isn't going to be such a bad New Year's Eve after all.
Hey, you brought your own music, huh?
Yeah.
As the attractive are wont to do, they shared some flirty banter.
I always come well equipped.
I bet you do.
If you have a lady speculating about things south of the equator, you have her where you want her. And our boy had something else to entice her with, too.
Including? Now, do you suppose we could find someplace private where we could share a glass of this before I punch in?
The man's name is actually Richard, and currently engaged in a year-end murder spree, Nurse Marley is just the next stopover in a jam-packed evening that he hopes will culminate in the murder of his wife, a radio DJ with whom he has already opened a dialogue as his killer alter ego.
Happy New Year to you, Blaze.
Despite his cold, calculated nature, he brings the heat.
I mean, it's a very good year, and this is made for special occasions.
And before you know it, they're stealing away.
And this is New Year's Eve, after all.
Right this way.
To celebrate with some music and libations and perhaps other things. She has no clue he's a psychologically twisted, emotionally broken, and deeply devious malcontent.
Afraid these will have to do.
They'll be just fine.
With a hatred for and a grudge against women, who has assumed the identity of a mission-oriented killer called Evil.
You bad,
No, just evil.
Not able to discern his true intentions, she only sees the flirty facade and proceeds incautiously, impulsively, and rashly. Don't threaten her with a good time. A cork popping? That's not at all evocative.
Now here is to us.
So many seeds sown, they drink to his toast. And without further preamble, he seeks to instigate a little closeness.
May I have this dance?
You don't waste much time, do you?
A handsome, manipulative user of women, this guy could be the inspiration for the song Smooth Operator.
I count every second.
Making her believe she is, at least for the moment, the center of his universe because he wants to get his rocks off, it would seem things are going to get steamy, or so Nurse Marley certainly thinks.
Hey, I've only known you for 10 minutes.
Doesn't matter.
One of those casual liaisons, At this point, she has no reason to think this is going to lead to anything other than cheap fornication.
Tonight? No.
And she's all in. Bunny's going to bunny, and her cottontail is puffed. I'm not personally opposed to promiscuity, morally or otherwise.
Now, what to talk about? What do you think of loose women?
I like them.
But such behavior should be conducted with a little more prudence and discretion than is displayed here.
Everyone's happy, hoping that the new year will bring better luck than the last.
Nurse Marley is certainly down for some mutual advantage taking, and will be completely blindsided by Richard's true intentions.
40 seconds, husbands and wives, lovers embracing.
With the countdown underway, now it's too late.
Even casual strangers caught up in the mass hysteria of this incredible moment.
Lips keeping her distracted, our urbane supposed doctor casually reaches over and starts a recorder. And reveals the implement with which he intends to get it on, so to speak.
15 seconds. 10, 9,
A form of rigid erection is achieved.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4.
Only guilt-free good lovin' isn't in the cards. As the ball drops, so too shall the blade.
3, 2, 1.
That penetration Nurse Marley anticipated achieved, only not at all how she fancied. Not often there's literally a countdown to the victim's slaughter. Thinking about it, coincidence sort of works similarly in horror to how it works in porno, adult erotica, because this twist of fate, this random encounter, could have as easily concluded with some steamy friskiness between strangers who enjoyed a chance tryst, ending with a glossy money shot, rather than a brutal stabbing. Since they are understaffed and it shouldn't take more than 5 or 10 minutes to smoke, a colleague comes looking for Nurse Marley. What she finds is the handiwork of a twisted miscreant and misanthrope who discards a young woman's body. Like an emptied candy bar wrapper, and weirdly, even though she's crumpled up dead, vestiges of a still active part of her, the enzymes in her saliva, still exist on his lips, like a trace smear of chocolate.
Listen, about that New Year's resolution you told me you were going to make, you were just driving me, were you?
Shortly after the kill, our diabolical killer executes the next part of his dastardly plan.
I just made my first kill.
Publicly propagandizing Nurse Marley's death by drafting her into his narrative.
Listen to the replay.
With his callous act, he reduces her whole life to a tragic and heartbreaking soundbite, meant to strike terror in the true aim of his sordid scheme.
3, 2, 1. Hallelujah from New York City.
More twisted than a coil of wire, he seems to know how to really turn the screws.
You'll hear from me in an hour.
Using Nurse Marley as a prop in every way he can.
Tell the police they can find her body somewhere in the Crawford Sanitarium.
Signing off with,
Have fun.
what a prodigious prick, and I'm not talking about what's in his trousers. I'm guessing that's, at best, adequate.
Oh, Lord.
For an exit that's only gory in passing and not terribly spectacular, being an easily imitated knife kill, what makes this one extraordinary? Could it be the modus prompting the exit, and furthermore, how it was used against someone who was a total stranger to the random victim?
When you're in a hole, stop digging.
After all, an exit can be extraordinary because it's in service of a greater narrative component, which Nurse Marley's demise definitely qualifies. Killing someone as a means of psychological gamesmanship and torture is a powerful play, but could it be that the exit's utility, the mechanics and forward thinking it exhibits, is truly what excels it to extraordinary? That it transcends the quality of the film's killer, Mr. Persona non grata, and maybe even the film itself? This one is far deeper and more stratified than its overall presentation suggests, the surface gloss detracting from the superior elements. I get a sense that within this flick there's a better film than the one we got. Nurse Marley's recorded and broadcast stabbing, an example of a superior element. The whole is not greater than the sum of its parts, unfortunately, and I speculate that it comes down to mixed messaging, overcomplication, and insistence on musical numbers. I doubt New Year's Evil is anyone's favorite slasher. Released at the tail end of 1980, it was part of the initial glut that came in the wake of Halloween's success, and managed to distinguish itself from the pack by presenting a loquacious, unmasked killer, with a sinister plan reliant upon having a personality, way too much coincidence, and what was state-of-the-art technology. Such killers weren't the preference. The lurking silent types were still all the rage. Basically, if the killer had a voice, they shouldn't use it until the last reel, and only to monologue their motive. Since this film isn't remembered as fondly as others, maybe not only making the killer a relatively normal guy with a face, well on the surface normal, but also making him a handsome forerunner of the negative side of the manosphere movement, who could weirdly pick up women at will despite his putsy nature, wasn't the best bet. But by distinguishing him even further as a modern tech aficionado, the film looked ahead in regard to technology and how it could be used in horror, fancying up your run-of-the-mill knife-kill slasher with a modern bent. In so doing, New Year's Evil foreshadowed Scream in the late 90s resurgence of the subgenre after a period not so much of dormancy, but diminishing returns and respect, which is saying something since from the starting gate. Such films garnered little deference beyond that offered by the fans, who critics deemed reprehensible for their fandom, pointing to a misogyny that may have existed in some form, but actually wasn't as pervasive as they would have us believe. Don't get me wrong, slashers did have what could be construed as misogynistic tendencies, many displaying unnuanced girls and their bared breasts, for those who enjoy such exhibition, but they also similarly made victims of the fellas, and in some cases more graphically and or cruelly. Ask the guys from Friday the 13th, the final chapter. So generally speaking, elements typically construed as hate directed toward women can't really be considered purposeful denigration, but instead sales tactics to garner the biggest audience possible. Respectable? No, but also not meant to convey any messaging either. The thing is, though, in this film, the unscrupulous killer does specifically, and rather perniciously, hate women, and for some very stupid reasons. So this one could definitely lose points for portraying such a foul perspective. But since it doesn't exactly let Blaze off the hook, it's more complicated than that. I need to choose my words carefully. Inelegance won't do because I need it to be clear. I'm in no way victim blaming Blaze for how Richard victimized her, because he most definitely did. I am, however, pointing out how she had a hand in Richard's mental state, making her an involuntary accessory, but an accessory just the same. Since it's not only from Richard's warped perspective, it could be construed her decisions drove him to it, since it's clear she relegated him right out of her life, pushing him into a space of total alienation within their marriage. She bears some guilt. And why? For better or worse, in sickness and in health, a married person has some responsibility for their spouse's well-being, and Maverick Blaze, determined to follow her own course, made Richard an afterthought, greatly contributing to his angst, frustration, and fury, a thorn in his side he could only tolerate so long, when she didn't even have the time nor desire to get in touch with her own husband.
I was wondering if you got in touch with Richard?
Yeah, Palm Springs.
Is it any wonder he felt isolated, set adrift? Many husbands would probably be a little peeved if it took a go-between just to make contact with their wife, and would maybe sink into depression and less than wholesome ways to cope.
At the club?
Right. And from the way he sounded, he had a head start on his New Year's Eve celebration.
Blaze seemed to find Richard quite repellent, even though he reflected conditions she created.
Christ.
I wouldn't count on him making it in for your show tonight.
Yeah, that figures.
By not balancing family and career in the proper proportions, and leaving him on the outs.
What is it?
Oh, Richard, he's in Palm Springs, coked up or loaded on him.
So what else is new?
With her disappointment bordering on anger palpable, her manager knew how to reinforce her hard feelings.
Be nice if he was here for a little moral support.
You don't need him, you never have.
While stroking her ego, and aggrandizing the importance of her complete devotion to her career.
Tonight's the big payoff, baby. Do what you've been plugging for.
That's showbiz for you. By the by, Richard killed her assistant. They say don't kill the messenger, but at what point does the messenger become a combatant? How many times did they spar over the phone? Her playing buffer, and putting him off on Blaze's behalf. Just the sound of her voice probably triggered him.
He must be a real bright maniac, this fella.
Anyhow, Blaze's reaction to Richard not coming suggests her disappointment had more to do with him failing to fulfill the role of doting husband in her pageantry than an actual need for moral support from him, since she already had plenty from others more important to her. I'm not saying that makes anything he did even remotely right. None of that lets him off the hook for his detestable actions. He selected about the unhealthiest means of dealing with his problems possible, and that's on him. In the end, it's also on him that he chose to live off his wife, to let her be his unquestioned benefactor, to be her subordinate, concealed in her shadow. He chose to not pursue his own interests beyond being a pampered house hubby and stay-at-home dad. Yet despite making himself all but invisible, he so wanted to be noticed by her. Even if anonymously, he was obsessed with tormenting the true focus of his murder spree, forging that involuntary complicity even before Blaze learned the awful truth. For many people, such a privileged but monotonous position proves unfulfilling, which is why so many wives of rich men pursue causes, throwing themselves into philanthropic endeavors. Richard focused his time into figuring out a way to really stick it to his uncaring wife. He accomplished this through a sicker form of voyeurism than most. Forced voyeurism usually is on the more depraved side. While the psychological torture of being forced to listen to someone's murder would be bad enough, to find out the killer only did it to get to you would likely be particularly guilt-inducing. Forcing Blaze to hear an innocent nurse's slaughter was one of those heights of diabolical horror that raises a middle-of-the-road flick to something a little better, something almost special.
The buffoonery is endless.
Of course, no matter how confidently Richard presented himself, no matter what, evil wasn't a high-value man. In fact, he was worse than a mewling mooncalf. He was a dumpster fire of unjustified rage, and when all was revealed, it became rather laughable that Nurse Marley responded to what she perceived as his cocksure big dick energy. I don't want to presume anything about his endowment, but one thing I'll say, however he was hung, what he exhibited due to lacking true masculine strength was such a toxic, cruel machismo, it proved he had a low opinion of what he could do with it, because he certainly didn't in his heart of hearts view himself as a capable man, only able to procure what he wanted through predatory actions. He played at being dominant, could even fake it enough to manipulate and kill, but he was a submissive through and through.
No way!
Ultimately, he also proved Nurse Marley a woman the sexual revolution screwed over, by leading her to perhaps being more susceptible to the wiles of a dangerous man, simply because she found him hot and charming. And in a world of sexual permissiveness, why not enjoy herself and celebrate New Year's with a boffo boffing? I mean, Bunny's going to bunny every time.
The crowd is pushing and shoving, but seems to care.
Without a fast seduction to position her as a compliant prop, his plans could have been foiled. Physically speaking, not the most capable killer in the slasher pantheon, it was apparent his talent at seduction was his best weapon. Maybe insight into how he wound up in a marriage with a Spitfire so pervasive and successful, when he stepped out from beneath her shadow, he wilted under the brilliance of her shine.
Relax.
What about Nurse Marley herself? How might Richard have pegged her, and very quickly, that made him focus on her as his victim? After all, he had limited time, so zeroing in on her was a gamble. Was it that she was horny? Was it Nurse Marley's libido that got her in trouble? I would say that was only one gap she was looking to get filled, and merely the prelude he exploited. Sometimes victims in a very brief time reveal way more context than the film they're in requires, their choices and actions giving deeper insight into their lives and personality, meaning sometimes an exit can also be extraordinary because it reveals, even if unintentionally, unbridled and implacable truths about the human condition, the sadness that can underline the spirit. Nurse Marley strikes me as a little sad, a little overworked, a little lonely. She's a nurse, yet she indulged in cigarettes. The risk of cancer, emphysema, and heart disease worth it for that couple of minutes here and there of relief and pleasure. She was an attractive woman who could have presumably had her choice of men, yet a little attention from a fine guy was enough to unlock her legs for a total stranger. Her predisposition to be open to evil's advances implies an underlying loneliness, a need for companionship, if only brief, perhaps poorly satisfied with a string of hookups with other medical professionals. Perhaps seeking to fill a void beyond the physical with the physical, she seems one of those hot-to-trot for handsome doctor-type nurses, and this wasn't her first roundup at the sexual rodeo, since succumbing to the wiles, ergo lassoing, of an attractive medicos came easily. Still, why might she be particularly open to this liaison? Around the holidays, a lot more light gets shined on life's failures. It seems unlikely she had a man committed to her during a time when being single is more pronounced, because it feels like an extra hard failure to be alone through the season, because it's a time to be shared with loved ones, and, if possible, a loving significant other. Can Nurse Marley be blamed for ramping up her naughty side to fill the various voids she needed filling? Richard likely targeted her because she was a liberated, empowered woman, not realizing the perceived currency in her freewheeling lifestyle was suffering horrible inflation. On the face of it, promiscuity seems fun, cheap pleasure and thrills because you only live once. This YOLO approach may lead to tons of great experiences, but there can be grievous downsides. It also is in a way, in most cases, to instigate a healthy long-term relationship. Unfortunately, before she knew what a low-value man had snagged her, she was metaphorically hogtied and ended up the stuck pig, her killer the real pig, a man driven to misogyny and chauvinism by his own insecurity, inadequacy, and perceived emasculation at the hands of a strong woman. Why did she fall for his BS? The instinct to not be alone, to couple up, even if only for a little while, can be a strong urge that compromises good sense. In the end, this is really about disproportionate justice meted by an unfair arbiter. Does Nurse Marley deserve to die because she was a bit loose, a bit of a good time girl? Of course not. But due to her gender, the killer lumps her in with all the castigating so-called bitches of the world, which to him are apparently a pyramid of every woman, with his wife at the tip top, as the pyramidion, a fancy word for capstone, but I find it befitting of Blaze. The problem was that Richard judged all women based on the narrow parameters he created, because he felt he was forced to grovel before a woman in order to secure his lifestyle. The point of Nurse Marley's exit, and the mechanics of how it was used, revealed a man who existed in a blind spot of his own making. A spoiled spoiler, Richard was like a kid who kicked over his own sandcastle. And even though he has a pail and scoop, throws a fit because Mommy made it for him, and now she's too busy sunbathing to put up a new one for him to knock over.
If I wanted a joke, I'd follow you into the John and watch you take a leak.
I have about reached the end of the rope, so I won't leave you dangling. Thanks for hearing out my nattering. Please share any refutations, opinions, accusations, japes, or other ideas in the comments below. And please join me for whatever I'm up to next time. Bye now.
Bye, creepy man! Keep it creepy!
He's a weird guy.
Goodbye!
You people amaze me. Here you create a problem and then you complain about it.
Oh.